everybody, and welcome back to Meadows. Hey, today I'm going to be canning some green beans, and I would like to show you the comparison between traditional water-packed green beans and what is called dry-packed green beans. Now, dry-packed veggies is a method of canning your vegetable without covering that vegetable inside the jar with water. Now, you still can it with the same method in your PC. You use water inside of your canner, but you do not cover the vegetable inside the jar with a water brine. So if you're interested in seeing the comparison between the two and hearing what my experience has been with them, stick around and I'll show you how. I want to do a side-by-side comparison from beginning to end between dry pack method and traditional water pack method. There's been a lot of discussions in the groups and also in other groups across Facebook about the controversy of dry packing. For 35 years, and before that, when my grandmother and my mother taught me as a child and a teenager how to can, for 35 years of my own adult life, I have been traditionally water packing all of my vegetables, just simply because that is how I was taught to can. A few years back, I learned about the dry pack method, and I was brave enough to go outside of my box and try it. And I'll be very honest with you, I loved it so much, I've never looked back. I dry pack most of my vegetables, not all of them, but most of them. It works really well in my own personal experience. It works really well for potatoes, carrots, green beans, asparagus. I've also seen really positive results now with beets being dry packed. Corn, not so much. Corn has enough natural sugars in it that it kind of scorches and burns. And so I suggest still water brining, or after you put your kernels of corn in your jar, making sure that you cover it with water before canning it, just simply because it scorches. But today I have green beans, like I said, and I want to walk you through the difference between the dry pack method and the traditional water pack method. So first of all, I'm going to aim my camera down so you can see what I'm doing, and then we'll get started. All right, so I have a combination of green beans and purple whole beans. Now, like I mentioned on my pickling video, purple whole beans, if they are harvested at a young age, they can be used just like a green bean, okay? It's the same thing. Now, once these purple whole beans get heated, they will turn green. The deep purple color just disappears and the green, the bean turns green. I don't know where it goes. It's just poof, bye-bye, woohoo, gone, see ya. I don't know where the color goes, but with heat, these purple whole beans do turn green. So you will not know the difference after I'm done canning. You will not see the difference between the purples and the greens, okay? All of that purple color will just disappear. First of all, when you're dry packing vegetables, what that means is that you are taking a raw vegetable and you are putting it in your jar, and then you are not covering that vegetable inside the jar with water or broth. All you're doing is you are packing the raw vegetable in there, placing the lid and the ring, and canning it according to the regular instructions. Okay, so with green beans, and I have quarts today, with green beans I pressure can for 25 minutes. Now you can also water bath these. One other thing I want to mention is if you are going to dry pack vegetables and water bath them where they are traditionally submerged underwater, you have your 2 inches of water above the lid and the ring of the jar. If you are dry packing, if you don't have a really heavy vegetable in there, sometimes those jars will want to float. You can invert or turn a plate, or if you have a rack, put a rack on top of them with a little bit of a heavy object on top of that to weight them down to keep them upright. Otherwise they will float around in your hot water bath simply because there's not the water inside of your jar. So that's just a little handy tip for those of you that want to water bath. I'm going to pressure can. Now, one of the other things that I have learned along my journey of dry packing vegetables is that you want to get your jar as densely packed as possible. Now, a lot of times when we are canning, we're in a rush, or, just to speed things up, we like to keep our cuts a little bit bigger. And that is fine to do, but you must understand that if you have larger cut vegetables, you're going to have a lot of wasted space in your jar, and when the vegetable cooks and kind of shrinks, you're going to have a gap at the top of your jar because the vegetable shrinks down and you'll have this big gap. So, and a very important thing to point out to you is get your jar as densely packed as possible. Now you want to do this really if you're brining in water too, filling your jar with water over your veggies. You want to get that jar as full as you can. And I've really found out that cutting my vegetables a little bit smaller is the key to a dense pack. Another thing that I figured out a couple of years back is when I'm making dilly beans, pickled green beans, a lot of times I will just put my beans in whole into my jar, okay? And this is how I would pack for my dilly beans. This is an extremely dense pack, okay? And this is exactly what you want to achieve in pressure canning. So I have densely packed my green beans. Now, I use a wide mouth jar, particularly, not necessarily for dilly beans, because with dilly beans, each person is just kind of wanting one or two beans, and they can mess around with picking those beans and getting them out of that regular mouth jar. But when I'm making pressure canned, just regular green beans, I'm going to use these for a meal, and I want these to dump out into a pan so I can heat them very quickly and very easily. So I personally prefer to use a wide mouth jar if I'm leaving my beans whole. And I densely pack these, and I had a little space at the top of my jar, and so I even packed in a few more green beans on top. Now, another important thing that I want to tell you is that with dry packed vegetables, you don't necessarily have to worry as much about your headspace. The reason for that is that you don't have that liquid in the jar, and so overflow and siphoning is not as much of an issue. There's no fluid going in this jar. Whatever fluid ends up coming out after canning is simply going to be rendered by these green beans. It's not going to fill up the jar at all. It's not going to overflow. So you can get right up to the rim or the lid of that jar. Now you can see that I have one purple whole bean here. Let's see if I can get an angle. One purple whole bean here that's really close to the lid, and a green bean that's really close to the lid. That's fine. Even if that touches the lid, it's fine, because as this cooks, it's going to shrink a little bit and move away from that lid, and it's not going to interfere with the sealing in dry packing. Okay? Another way that I do dry pack is I cut my beans. Now you can see that I have cut these, not itty bitty tiny pieces, but they're kind of bite-sized pieces, maybe not as large as what you yourself do at home. Now you can cut your beans however you want. I'm not telling you how to do it, but I have noticed, again, if I cut them a little bit smaller, they fit together. If you guys all remember that one video game, it was called Tetris, where you turn those puzzle pieces and you try to drop them into place so that they fit together and lock together as close as they can. That's what you want to do with your veggies. Now, whether that be carrots or green beans or potatoes or beets, whatever it is, you want to get them in your jar as densely packed as you can, okay? You don't want to waste space, and you also don't want a whole lot of empty space so that when your vegetables cook, it just shrinks all down into the bottom half of your jar and you have this half-empty jar, because cooked vegetables do shrink, okay? So get that jar packed as full and as densely as you can. Now these are completely raw, all right? Crunch, crunch, crunch. Raw green beans. I have not blanched. There's no reason to blanch. I just snapped the part of the green bean off that was attached to the plant, and then I wash and I cut them. So I'm going to show you how I pack my beans. Excuse me, I'm talking with my mouth full. I love green beans. Fresh green beans are the best. So I have a clean jar. Now when you're pressure canning, I don't feel like you need to sanitize your jar. A lot of people want to boil this jar in water. My theory on that is yes, I can boil this jar in hot water and sanitize it. But once I take it out of the water, it's exposed to all of the germs and the yeast in the air again. And it's really technically no longer sanitized. When you're pressure canning, if you pressure can anything for over 10 minutes, everything is sanitized anyway. So I do not bother sanitizing my jar. Again, take from my videos what you will, leave what you don't want. Hopefully I'll give you some good tips or some time-saving steps that you can implement, but I'm not telling you that this is the way that you have to do it. I'm telling you this is the way that I do it, okay? And maybe it will relieve some people's fear. So I take my clean jar, all right, and hand washed or in the dishwasher is absolutely fine. Clean jar, and I use a funnel on the top. My clean and cut beans, I just start adding to the jar. Now, in any of my packs, whether it's dry pack or whether I add water, I want to settle those beans down in there as much as I can. So I stop and I kind of shake and press my fingers down in there. Try to get those beans packed in there as tight as you can, okay? Take another handful, kind of shake and settle them down. Push a little bit with your fingers. Sometimes I feel like people miss out on a lot of space in their jars. There's a lot of empty space in between the veggies that really technically does not have to be there. Pack that jar as full as you can. And there too, you're getting more veggies in the jar for only one lid, okay? If I didn't pack that as tight, there's not as much finished product in there, and I'm just kind of wasting jars and lids that way. So make sure that you get it nice and full. I'll add a couple new, couple pieces on top, but I've brought it up to within about, oops, I better bring it down where you can see. I brought it up to about an inch headspace, all right? Now I'm going to traditionally pack this jar, okay? And in a traditional pack, let me get rid of my my bowl out of the way there. In a traditional pack, you pack your green beans and then you cover them with water. Salt is always only an option in canning. Most canning recipes do call for salt, but there is no preservation factor when you are canning, okay? It is for taste only. So if you have a low sodium diet or you, just don't feel like adding the salt, you don't have to. That's not an issue at all. I am going to add salt to my traditionally packed green beans simply because we do like salt in our house. And with the water that will go into this jar, the water will carry the salt all the way throughout the jar into the green beans to flavor them. Now with my dry pack jars, there's no need to add salt because without water in there, if I put a half a teaspoon or 1 teaspoon of salt in here, what's going to happen to that? It's just going to fall right through to the bottom of the jar. It's not really going to stick on the beans and flavor them. It's just going to fall through. With my cut green beans, if I put a half a teaspoon or 1 teaspoon salt on top of them, that teaspoon of salt is going to stay right at the top and just permeate those top few beans and not affect the ones beneath it at all. So in dry pack, I do not add salt. there's just no reason to do it, okay? Just season it after you open it. But with my traditionally water-packed stuff, I am going to add a little bit of salt to that, just simply because the water will carry it throughout the jar. So there's my salt to that one, and then we just take, now another thing, I'm going to stop myself right now. I have raw beans from the garden, just freshly picked and freshly prepared, which are just at room temperature. I have not blanched them. They're not hot at all. They're just raw and room temperature. My jar is room temperature. My canner is room temperature, okay? So my water can be room temperature. You do not have to pour hot water over your beans. When you put them in the canner, everything heats up together. The purpose of blanching is to, number one, preserve the color. Number two, sometimes you choose to blanch in order to soften the vegetables so that you can pack them into the jar a little easier. With green beans, you can cut them so that they settle into the jar just fine. Everything is room temperature. I'm putting in room temperature water. It doesn't have to be boiling water. And I will fill that just up to the top of the beans. Oops, let's get a little lower. Just up to the top of the beans to cover the beans at that 1-inch headspace. Okay? Now, I think I forgot to bring over my washcloth. Hang on just one moment. Okay, so I have, like I said, I was canning grape juice earlier today. This was a clean laundered washcloth that I just had wet with water, and that's all I'm going to use to wipe off the rims of my jar because there's no grease involved here. Now, if I was packing meat of any kind, sometimes soups and things like that, I would use a vinegar-soaked cloth or paper towel. But since I'm just doing green beans, there's really no grease to worry about, and so I'm not going to do the vinegar wipe. I'm just going to do a water wipe, okay? Just to make sure that there isn't any little bits and pieces of green bean or whatever on there that I can't see. Now I'm going to take my canning lids. These are used lids. In fact, you can see, oh, how strange is that? These were actually already pressure canned. Can you see that? Green bean, 820. So here we are now in 8 of 21. I'm going to reuse this lid, okay? And due to the heat of a pressure canner, I do not feel like I need to reheat my lids and plump up my, my sealing compound because it gets really good and hot in there, and it will form to the top of the jar. Now, I don't want to have anybody arguing about whether you can or cannot reuse canning lids. Some of us do reuse canning lids. We have for years, and in this time when canning lids are so difficult to find for some people, no judgment on whether they are reusing the single-use lids. You do what you have to do to feed your family. So there's no judgment on reusing lids here, okay? All right, another thing I forgot. I guess I wasn't really prepared for this video at all. I'm just busy canning and preparing things. I gotta run and get a couple of rings, but that'll just take me a second. I always have them handy in a nearby drawer. So now on this one I am using obviously the tin lids, and I didn't prepare any wide mouth glass lids. I do have some wide mouth glass lids which I probably should be using, but I didn't prepare them and I didn't get them heated up, and so I'm just going to go with tin lids today on this project. So with the tin lids, you've wiped the rim, you've placed your flat lid. Now, like I said, it doesn't matter if a few of those little ends are touching that lid at all. As long as they're not out over the rim where they're going to interfere with your seal, you're fine, okay? They're going to shrink a little bit. Screw on your band, finger tight, and place it in your canner. Same thing here. Finger tight, place it in your canner. Same thing with the water brine, okay? water packed, however we want to say it. I guess it's not really a brine, it's a water pack. But this is the one that is filled with water over our green beans, okay? And so screw that finger tight, place it in your canner. Now most people use a little splash of vinegar in here. Let me move this up a little bit so you can see my smiling face again. Hey, nobody ever said that I was a model. Anyway, most people add a little splash of vinegar to their canners, whether it be a pressure canner or hot water bath canner. I have started using cream of tartar. I just feel like that is a little bit more gentle on my flat lids and my screw-on bands. But I've mentioned that in other videos, so I'm sure that you've all heard it before. But anyway, so I have my canning water in there, about 2.5 quarts of water, and I put in just a little bit of cream of tartar, as you saw, and that's all there is to it. I'm going to move my towel back from the stove, though, so that we don't start a fire. So I place the lid. Yep, you can still see everything. Place the lid on my Presto and lock it shut. And then I'm going to turn on the heat, and I'm going to bring this up to a vent. I will vent for 10 minutes, and then I will place my weight, and I will pressure can them for 25 minutes. Now remember, I have quarts in here. Pints of green beans are 20 minutes. Quarts of green beans are 25 for the pressure canner. Now if you choose to do a hot water bath, you need to hot water bath your green beans for a full 3 hours. And I can tell that that is the water packed one, and this is one of the dry packed ones, and the other dry packed one. Traditional water brined beans. Okay. Now you can tell that there wasn't very much shrinkage in that because the water kind of keeps, I guess, the plumpness, if you want to call it that, in the beans. And then this is the dry packed beans. You can see that they've shrunk, like I said they would. They've shrunk a bit. You can also tell that there is moisture, condensation and moisture that's cooked out of the beans that is in that jar. But look at how wonderful and green they look. They look absolutely beautiful. It's really hard for me to look at my screen and make sure that everything's in the cam. They look beautiful. Now here is the example of, I had that one dry pack jar that I put all of the beans on end in, okay? And this is the difference between the cut beans and the whole beans that are on end. So here are the whole beans that were all on end. And you can see that that really remained looking nice and full. Okay, you see the difference there? All right, so I'm going to allow these to cool off for quite a bit longer. They will seal, and once they're cool enough for me to safely open the jar, I will open the water brined and the dry packed, and I will show you, like with a fork test, how tender they are and what the differences are. So we'll come back in just a little bit. Alright guys, so here we are back for the comparison on between the dry pack and the regular water packed green beans. Now again, I will just kind of recap with you. I personally prefer to pack my green beans on end in my jar. And the reason why that is because the green beans do cook down, and you can see, you know, now when I packed this jar, y'all saw how tight I packed it. in the cooking process, the beans shrink and settle some more. Even though I shook the jar and kind of packed them down in there, they do settle in. So you do have a little excess space up here. Now, I have found that that excess head space, even after, you know, they've cooked down a little bit, that excess head space does not really affect anything. I have had dry canned greens particularly on my shelf for up to 3 years time with no problem at all, and then usually we consume them. So I really can't give you an exact date of shelf life, just simply because we always eat ours before, you know, a certain period of time. We grow green beans every year, and so I'm always rotating my stock. But I did set aside a jar for approximately 3 years, and I had no problem with it at all. It was still fresh and green. Of course, I store all my things in no sunlight area and a cool area, but there was no mold, there was no unsealing. They were absolutely perfect at the point of 3 years. But I do prefer, just simply because it kind of keeps the jar a little bit more full, and I just kind of think that it looks a little neater, just in my opinion. I like to put them on end, and I feel like I can get more beans in the jar that way. But for today's comparison, I am going to do the cut green beans, the comparison between the water packed and the dry packed, okay, for you, so that you can see how they actually turn out. Okay, so we have our water packed here, and most people do the water pack, and so you know that they're very tender. You know, you can stick your fork right in them. They're very, very tender. I feel like, I mean, the flavor of them is really, really good. Okay, I've canned green beans this way all of my life up until about 4 years ago. So I'm accustomed to these type of beans. I love these type of beans, and they're great. But, you know, you can tell that, like, even some of the water in there, you can tell that it's kind of colored. Some of the flavor of those green beans have been kind of washed out in that water brine. And so even though they're very tender and they're very tasty, I just feel like some of that flavor is lost in that water brine. That's just my opinion. Now here are the dry packed beans. Now dry packed beans are as soft. I found an interesting comment the other day. Somebody was saying, well, why would you want to dry pack? Well, I personally feel like, number one, they're a little better texture. Number two, they're a little bit better flavored. And that person had also responded, I don't want dry, tough beans. Well, as you can see, these are not dry, and they are not tough by any means. They are firmer, okay? They're a lot firmer than, let's do this comparison. They are firmer than water-packed beans, okay? It takes a little bit to get that to break. Where with this, it just kind of is limp, and, well, you know what? That's a really good comparison too. I really can't even get this bean to break. Okay, look at me. I can't get that bean to break. It's kind of mushy and gummy, and let's do another one. Well, okay, that one did break. How do I describe this to you? It's really difficult for me to find words. They're just firmer. They're a firmer bean, and they have a little bit more solid texture, where these are super soft and kind of on the, I don't want to say mushy, because these are not mushy by any means, but there's definite taste difference. Taste difference, I think what I would tell you The other day I was describing dry packed potatoes, and I tried to explain the difference between taking a fresh vegetable and boiling it to cook it, or taking a fresh vegetable and baking it in your oven. And the dry pack is, in texture and taste, it's a little bit more closer to baked vegetables instead of boiled vegetables, where all of the flavor and whatever is kind of boiled out of it. So, but there is your comparison. I don't know if you can see also. I'll see if I can get it on cam here. Get them closer to you. I don't know if you can see. This is my dry pack. This is my water pack. Do you see the color difference? The color is a little bit better too. These are a little bit more fresh green looking than the water packed ones. But anyway, so there's the difference between the water pack and the dry pack. Like I said, I've been doing the dry pack method for quite a few years now, very successfully. I do not have any more lid failure rates than what I do with my water packed stuff. I prefer the results. My family prefers the results. I'm just really sold on this method. So there it is. If you feel inclined to try it in your kitchen, more power to you. I encourage you to do that. If you don't feel comfortable with the idea of dry packed veggies, that's fine too. But now you've seen with your own eyes that it is a viable, reliable way of canning veggies with no real negatives at all. So hopefully that gave you a little insight on the discussion or the idea. Sorry that this got a little bit long today. Well, yeah, I guess all of my videos have been getting a little bit long. I'm long-winded, what can I say? But I do want to be thorough for you also, so that you can really see what I do, and I can give you as much information as possible so that you can make decisions when you're canning things. But I do want to say thank you for joining me again, and happy canning, everybody.